I'm Adele Jones, Executive Director of the Sustainable Food Trust. For those of you who don't know the SFT, we're a small UK-based charity with a mission to speed up the transition to regenerative agriculture on a global scale. And if any of you know me, you know that I'm a little bit obsessed about measuring things. And there's a lot of conversations going on at Groundswell this year, previous years, about how we measure progress, how we baseline farm sustainability, and then how we can use that information to drive change in agriculture. And so we thought it would be good today to convene some of the leading voices who are thinking about this, give you a bit of an update on the Global Farm Metric, which is our contribution to this work. And yeah, really talk about why we feel measurement of on-farm sustainability is incredibly important as part of this agriculture transition that we're all on, not least because it provides farmers with a dashboard, you could say, of where are you starting from, how are you doing year on year, not a kind of binary, you have to meet this standard to be good, and if you don't meet the standard, you're bad, but a spectrum of sustainability so we can all understand how we can be slightly better year on year. But also for companies, for government, to be able to use that information then to finance agriculture in a different way. We've been talking a lot, various sessions about natural capital markets, biodiversity credits, the new government schemes, of course, what banks are thinking about in terms of green financing, all these different mechanisms that we could use to finance agriculture in a different way. If those things aren't all glued together in a coherent structure, which allows the farmer to understand how each of the new revenue streams fit together and drive change in the same direction, we'll be in a complete mess. So from our perspective, common measurement, common holistic measurement is the glue that sticks all these new innovative schemes, frameworks, funding streams together. The other important thing to say is there's also been a lot of talk this week about greenwashing. There's obviously a lot of companies out there who are setting regenerative agriculture strategies with, you could say, to be cynical, varying degrees of authenticity. But again, common measurement, common robust measurement is the antidote to greenwashing. So if we can make sure all these companies all over the world are using the same measures to monitor their producers and throughout their supply chain, we can know whether they're delivering on their regenerative agriculture strategies. I think that's a really important point that I think we'll probably pick up on later on this panel. So we're going to start, I've got a brilliant panel here today. We're going to start thinking about the metrics to start with. So Fabia's going to give an update on the Global Farm Metric, which I'm sure some of you know, but she'll just give a bit of a summary and talk a bit about what we've been doing for the last year or so. Bridget from CEH is then going to talk about hang on Bridget, let me get it right, the soil fundamentals tool. So we're going to dig into one particular area and talk a little bit more about soil metrics. And then we're going to talk about how those metrics are applied, how they're used to drive change in a certain direction. So we've got Joe here from Soil Association Exchange, who is going to talk about how we use software and how that links to farm advisors to help farmers transition to more sustainable practices. Tracie's here from NatWest Bank. She's going to talk a little bit about how banks could use this information to develop new financing packages, as well as for monitoring things like Scope 3 emissions. And then Richard's going to wrap up the panel talking about how farmers use this, of course, the most important stakeholder in the room. And then, of course, we'll have a discussion and Q&A. So without further ado, I am going to hand over to Fabia for a bit of a GFM update.
So much has happened in 1 year. And what's interesting about looking at, and I'm sure this is true of all of us, at a field like this, the question you were trying to answer when you came in has changed as you get closer to the solutions that you're trying to find. I think one of the most striking things is 2, 3, 5 years ago, the idea of data was almost a dirty word. And now we've gone to the other extreme, where all we talk about is data. And of course, what's so terrifying about that, other than you could say a huge, in my world it should be a huge positive, is it means that data, the demands on the farmer is that, there's too many demands for data, it's all different, it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't add up. So what we have been doing this year, when we think about the framework for the Global Farm Metric,
Phoebe, do you just want to say what global farm metric is? Right, just right, top level.
Okay, top level. Global farm metric, a holistic framework for measuring sustainability at farm level. Very much looking about how do you create a sustainable system across environment, social and economic, the whole farm system. How is it sustainable? How is it resilient? And what are the risks to that system? That's the lens, that's where we started. But really the framework starts about organizing that system so that you understand what are all the different parts and how are they interconnected with each other. That's taken us a long time because there are very, very many different lenses you can apply to it. You will see, those of you who've been watching the global farm metric, that the wheel has changed. The wheel has now 2 interlinking circles on the outside, because although we are very much about primary data and measuring outcomes, measuring what you can see the changes taking place to that system over time, the only way that that is important is measuring those outcomes against the practices you use and thinking about those practices and the impacts that they have, both on your farm and more widely. So there is a real link between the two. So very, very quickly, one of the things we've really spent a lot of time thinking about is the difference between primary data, the data that you own, that you know, that you understand, and that can monitor the changes that are really happening for you on the ground, and the model data, the thing that everyone's talking about, your greenhouse gas impacts, et cetera, which is built out of some of your data, the practice you're doing, but goes into that big black box and spits out a number and tells you what the likely impacts of that are. They're very two different things, both important, but what the GFM very much focuses on the former. So organizing data, the thing that's come down the chain since we started out is, there's many, many other people in the space. There's an enormous amount of top-down reporting that's coming in, looking at very specific parts of the system. And what we're trying to say to the world as a mission is, if you can organize your data from the bottom up, you can answer all the problems that come from the top down, and that's the name in the game. So it's getting the message out that all the corporates looking for, all the supply chain, looking for data to answer the problems that they're going to have to do in TNFD or TCNFD or the sustainable reporting requirements, are not different. They should all be reporting based on this idea of the sustainable farming system and the data that we capture down there. If we get it right, people like Sachs and all the other players who are collecting data and advising farmers have a starting point in which to make it easier to get to join up the dots with the data and help it move around the supply chain as evidence of what's going on. That's quite enough for me, I think.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. Thank you. And it's worth saying that the GFM coalition now has about 130 organisational partners representing farming groups, farming unions, retailers, food companies, certifiers, banks, investors, universities. So we're really trying to convene everyone so that everyone is using the same framework, the same metrics, the same language to measure and report on change, because otherwise it's a total minefield. So we're really about convening everyone under this common means of measuring. But Bridget, we're going to go to you next to dive in on one of the categories and talk a little more about your soil metrics at CEH.
Great, thank you. So I think this is one of the few audiences I ever have to come to convince that soil is at the heart of everything. It is your biggest capital. It is the resource you're going to pass on to the next generation. So I just can skip over that. So often I don't have to. And the key thing is we just need to measure it. And we do know every field is different, every farm is different, and just think of the fabulous diversity across the UK landscape. So does that mean we can't do benchmarks? We can't help guide people as to what is the potential for their particular soil type, for the particular land use that they're using it for, and their climate that they have. All of those things affect the metrics that you will measure. So what we've done is created a new tool, and I know there's lots of tools out there, and the one thing I would say is just measure your soil, pick a tool, go with it, let's not get competitive. But if our tool interests you, we've been measuring at a national soil monitoring program since 1978, and we suddenly realized if we just disaggregated that and said, well, can we identify benchmarks for a particular soil type, land use, and not just grassland or arable, but heathlands and wetlands and woodlands. So all those lovely bits of habitat land you have in your farm, you can now go and assess the quality of soil there, and the rainfall. So you go into the tool and you go, right, I'm arable, and then you sort of say, what soil type am I? If you know that, that's great. If not, you can go down a little key that helps you tell that, and then you put in your rainfall. If you don't know that, we've got a little map that tells you what it is. You press the button, and it gives you the population from all the samples we've had from for the last 40 years all across Great Britain. And it tells you the typical range of people in your same situation is this: for organic matter content, worm count, pH, and bulk density. Now we've got loads more metrics, but we thought, keep it simple, do those 4 things, because nearly every soils person will say those are your 4 key metrics. And it will, so you, for these 4 things, it will tell you, it'll give you a little population, it'll tell, and you can then look at your number, put your number in and go, oh my goodness, I'm in the bottom 10%. Don't need to tell anyone, it's yours, we don't want to know it, but you can see how far, for your soil type, your vegetation, and your climate, how far you could go. So it's a way of you setting yourself a target if you want to. If you're an advisor, it's a way of helping people understand what the potential of their soil system is. So the tool is called SOD, Soil Fundamentals. I've not been forgiven for naming it that, but we were quite proud of that. It's memorable, right? SOD. Got some cards here, I'll put at the front. Please have a play with it. If it works for you, that's great. If you're already using another tool, that's great. The main thing is just measure, 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 and track over time to make sure you're improving yourself. If you want to benchmark yourself, the SOD tool might be for you. Thank you, Adele.
Thank you, Bridget. And just a quick question. So how far away are we away, do you think, from having a set of soil metrics which genuinely everyone is using? And I know Sustainable Soils Alliance are in the audience as well, but how close are we, do you think?
Well, we once did a thing where I emailed lots of soils people and said, you know, if you can measure 3 things, what would they be? And we're all agreeing on the same things. Now, at that point, there's a cloudburst where we all go into our own specialisation. But I think if you look into nearly all these tools, they all are focusing on organic matter, pH, and some kind of measure of structure. Worms, everyone loves worms. They're quite hard to do, actually. And in our tool, we're actually then asking people, what's the other things you want? NPK, well, that's been available for a while, and you might go to something else for that. I think we're coalescing, and one of the jobs of work might be to all get in a room and go, can we try and simplify and bring them together? But at the moment, have a look at the tools and decide which one works for you. But I think we're actually, after being very disparate, we are coming together.
Brilliant. It's good. Very reassuring to hear. Okay, so we've talked about whole farm frameworks. We've talked about soil metrics specifically. We're now going to move to think about how we use these metrics to drive change. So, Joseph, over to you to talk a little bit about the SACS platform and what you're doing.
Super. Yeah, nice to see you all. My name is Joseph Gridley. I run a small service for farmers called Soil Association Exchange. You may have heard of the Soil Association. We've been around for a very long time, 77 years. Best known for the stuff we do with organic farmers, but we work with all farmers and exchanges for all farmers. And when we kind of looked at this problem, everyone likes talking about data, but I think for me anyway, I get lost in it sometimes. And we always came back to this question of like, why is this useful for a farmer? And the 2 things that we always come back to is data should either get a farmer paid, get them some kind of financial incentive, or data should inspire them to action, inspire them to do something that's better for climate and nature. And so we built a service to really like drive in, to really drill down on the metrics that do those 2 things, get a farmer paid and inspire them to action. The second thing, you hear, you should be measuring your birds, your water, your soils, the mental health of your staff, and before you know it, you've got no time to actually put any crops in the ground because all you're doing is collecting all this sustainability stuff. And so we spent a huge amount of time making it simple. And we make it simple for farmers to get all of this information in 2 ways. One, we use lots of technology. So we use things like satellite imagery and LiDAR and data modeling and things like that. So that speeds it up for you. You can, take 20% of your field, sample those, and we can help you extrapolate those across different bits of your farm. But we also think technology doesn't solve all of this. In fact, it's probably quite dangerous. And so we've got a huge team of people. We've got 45 people that come out and they will help you go through a carbon calculator. They will come out and help you take water samples, dig soil pits, so that you can have real rigor, that you know that you've got this data in a way that stands up to scrutiny. And the final thing that we always heard from farmers was it's really annoying that, you know, if you are selling milk to Arla and wheat to M&S, that they want you to report on sustainability in different ways, and you end up basically doing a version of the same measurements 3 times, and it will drive you mad. And so it's why we love the Global Farm Metric. I think it's a brilliant concept, and it's why we've spent a lot of time on the industry side with Exchange, getting banks, processors, retailers to want to see the data in the same way. So a farmer, you collect your sustainability information with us one time, and then you can slice it up and you can serve it back to the people that are interested in it with just the click of a button. So it makes your life much easier. So that's how we do it. We help a farmer to measure, and then we turn it into kind of actionable insights on your farm and get you financially rewarded for those bits. We've been going about 2 years now. 300 farmers are using it currently, all over the UK, all different shapes and sizes, all different enterprises, and the feedback's really positive. They like it because sustainability data is no longer in the abstract, but it's helping them get price premiums. It's helping them see whether, I don't know, biodiversity net gain is a good idea or not. It's helping them understand, I don't know, what seed mixes would be a good thing to stick in which fields. And yeah, we'd love to talk to any of you farmers out there that might be interested in getting involved.
Brilliant, thanks, Joseph. And as you said, we're working closely together to try and integrate conversations and the framework that the Global Farm Metric Coalition is working on into the SACS platform. It's brilliant, you know, actual means of getting this out on farms and then making something happen as a result of the measurement. Because of course measurement is a means to an end at the end of the day. We need to do it to drive change. But you're obviously talking to banks, supermarkets, all these people. You're seeing a genuine desire now for everyone to come together and use the same metrics to measure and report. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. We're working with banks, supermarkets, retailers, and I think they know that whether it's their customers, whether it's regulation, that they need this information now, and they've got 2 choices. They can either kind of model it, and then in fact the downside of that, if you know, I don't know, do the environmental footprint of a pack of butter just off a life cycle analysis, then you don't see any of the variation in all the brilliant farms that you might be working with. You don't see any variation in the things you've incentivized them to do. And so there's no point in the exercise. But they've always found it too hard to get this stuff off individual farms. But now there's a way, through things like GFM and what we're doing, they can start to plug that in and you can see, oh, you can get, you know, better environmental butter, or you can get a green loan because you can show your bank that you're doing good things for the environment.
Fantastic, thank you. So we're now going to go to one of those stakeholders, banking sector. Tracie's here representing NatWest. And obviously some pretty fundamental shifts have happened in the last few years for you that have meant you really now need this data. So do you want to talk a little bit about why?
Yeah, definitely. Perfect. So hello, yes, I'm Tracie from NatWest Bank. I'm Innovation Lead in Climate Data for the bank. I'm very much feeling like the imposter in the room today because I'm not an agri-expert by any way, shape or means. But I guess if I take you on a little bit of a journey, it kind of explains how we got to where we are now. So back in 2020, Alison Rose, our CEO, announced that we were going to be a purpose-led organisation. And part of that meant that we needed to do our bit for climate change by halving our emissions, financed emissions by 2030, and then net zero by 2050. We're a heavily regulated industry as well, rightly so, and with things like TCFD coming down the line, meaning that we needed to do reporting on our climate impacts, led us to kind of scratching our heads a bit that traditionally banks have never really been interested in all that much data about a farm other than does it work as a profitable business in its own right. So we had this bit of a black spot of data, and we were super conscious that we didn't want to go out there to our farmers and say, oh, hey, here's another 200, 300-point survey. Can you fill it in for us? That would be great. Thank you very much. Because they would tell us exactly where we could shove that particular survey. So we looked at what else was going on in the industry, and that's when we came across the work that the SFT have been doing with their farmers working group for the last 8-9 years now. And we've been working with you for 2-3 years, I think. And really liked the idea of actually, if we're going to do something for good, let's do it for the industry as a whole, and let's reduce the burden of things like data collection on farmers and trying to make it, you only need to collect it once. Facilitate that data sharing across multiple different tools and solutions. And also, as Joseph mentioned, we're looking at things like remote sensing data. So how can you start to pre-populate some of that data as well to ease the burden? So we ran a couple of farm trials, and we were expecting quite a significant pushback from our farmers on the amount of data, but actually it was really positive, and they could see the benefit for it. They could see that it was going to show them strengths and weaknesses. It would show them how things were changing over time. Also the potential to do things like benchmarking could be a possibility in the future as well. And they actually asked for more data collection because then it would be more useful to them. So that was something that really kind of struck a chord in what we tried to do going forward. Is we know that whatever we do has to give a benefit back to the farmers. So reporting is one aspect that obviously is on us, but many of our farming customers will also have to do reporting as well. So actually, how do we start to facilitate that, particularly for some of our smaller customers? We have a tool called the Carbon Planner, which we're working on an agri-specific module, which will link in with the GFM. So all tying it up quite nicely. And also financing. So we have a commitment to lend £7 billion worth of green or sustainable lending to farmers, to the agriculture industry as a whole by 2024, I think that is. But to bring that to life, we had, with the cost of living crisis, the increase in fertiliser costs, the increase in energy prices, we had one particular farm whose annual energy spend had gone from £750,000 to £4 million overnight. And that made them, on paper, an unsustainable business. So we worked out a case for that farmer to support them, looking at things like on-site energy generation, but we need to be able to do that at scale. It's a massive transition that we need to undertake, and we can't do that without the data. So that's why the GFM is so important, and we're incorporating that into things like risk planning, transition planning, all that we're hoping we can help our farming customer base through the transition journey.
Thank you, Tracie. And one of the conversations we've been having a lot recently is how do we link up with other stakeholders who need this data. So of course, NatWest farming customers will also supply Tesco, let's say, or they might supply McDonald's. And so we're thinking now about some of these joint trials, aren't we, to think, and how the data can flow to multiple places so that the farmer just does one audit, not 6, basically.
Yeah, and that's the focus for the next pilot that we're looking at doing later on this year and into next year, which is actually how do we prove out the capability of the GFM to meet multiple stakeholder needs. So we can put a hand up as a bank and say, right, we're using it for X, Y, Z, and we can get farmers on board and say how it's helping them, but actually how does it help the food system as a whole? The retailers, the food producers, the certifiers, government, all of those bodies need to come together. And yeah, that's what we're hoping to prove out in our next trial.
Thank you. Okay, Richard, you are, arguably on this panel the most important stakeholder in this discussion because you're the one who's doing this. You're doing all the hard work. We're just talking heads, really talking about why this data is important. But from your perspective, you've been measuring on your farm for a little while now. And why do you think that's important? And what does the common data, so everyone using the same metrics, what does that bring for your business?
Thank you, Adele. Yes, I'm Richard Gantlett. I farm at Yatesbury House Farm in Wiltshire. Some of you may have been to our farm. You're all welcome. I think the first thing is that we all like a good pat on the back, and perhaps that's why we do it sometimes. But I do think it's really important to realize that all our farms are different. That's good for UK agriculture because any shocks that come along, they're not going to affect us all. And so we're still going to be producing food. If we were all doing the same thing, that just might not happen. So every farm, as we've heard, has different soil, different topography, different climate, but more importantly, different people, different farmers. That's you. And that's the most important ingredient. we can therefore all expect different outcomes to whatever we're doing on our farms. So I feel it's less important to compare with our neighbours, and more important that our metrics show us the direction of travel. So it's not important where we're starting from, it's the direction we're going. And to do that, we need to measure 2 points. And if you haven't started already, well, today is a good day to start. You can prepare. And secondly, it's so important to record your methodology, the methods you've used, because if you're doing something today, recording, and then you record it again or measure again in 5 years' time, you've got to use the same method. It's no good taking your soil to a different laboratory in 5 years' time. It makes your results useless. And that's why a lot of farmers have bad experience with testing soil organic matter, for example, because they don't realize they're actually testing with different laboratories who are using different methods. So just a really important warning. And one other tiny bit of advice is from the point of view of we've had used so many metrics over the years. In your accounts, don't just record the cost of something, but record the quantity at the same time, so that when someone asks you how much of this diesel or whatever they're asking you about, you've got the quantity there. And it's the quantity that leads to the carbon usage or consumption all the time. So just record quantities while you're going in your accounts. It's such an easy thing to do. So we've used various metrics over the years, and I'm a naturally curious person, as many of you are, and that's why you're in this room, of course. I'm curious about our farming system, and particularly about the soil. As some might have said, fanatical over the years, or mad. I'd like to think passionate, perhaps. But I did decide to do a PhD as a result of that. And I don't suggest any of you do that, because it did take me 7 years. But if anyone wants to, come and talk to me afterwards. So what did we discover? Well, we discovered that we are storing carbon 2 to 3 times faster than global targets. And these global targets have been shown to be really difficult to achieve. So that's really exciting. And many of you will be doing the same thing, but perhaps you don't know about it. From our carbon audit, we show that we're fixing 10 times more carbon than we are emitting. That's 10 times more carbon than we are emitting, we're storing on our farm. So that's another really exciting thing. It's the same evidence reported in a different way. But a lot of you will be doing very similar things on your farms, and using these metrics, you can discover that and share that, and other people can learn from it too. So how do we do it? Well, it was with one word, it's biodiversity. But more importantly, we didn't set out to store carbon or do any of the things that we're measuring. We set out to do one simple thing, and that's increase the life in the soil. And that everything else came from that.
Thank you. I've got a question. So how many audits do you do on your farm each year?
I've no idea.
Too many to count.
Too many to count, yes.
Okay. And so the idea of a more integrated approach, where you're doing potentially one integrated audit each year, and then that information is being sent off to all the various people that need to see it for different reasons.
It would be very helpful, and to be honest, they are coalescing, which is great. And just recently we've done a recent audit with the Soil Association, and we already had a lot of the data from other previous audits. So and they just keyed straight in. So yes, it's very helpful. It saves me a lot of time, and actually means I can say yes. When someone comes and says, "Can I do another audit?" Yes, because it's not then so time consuming.
Brilliant. Well, I'm gonna ask the panel a difficult question, because I'm preempting that this one's going to come up, because it generally does, and it's one of the hardest questions we have to try and grapple with, and it's about governance. Who should govern this framework? Is it government? Is it national government? Is it local government? Is it international government, like the FAO or UN? Should it be governed by a sort of coalition of stakeholders who are using it, a little bit like the fair trade model? That's another option. Or should it be a sort of arm's length government body like the AHDB, for example, in this country? I'm interested in each of the panel's thoughts about who should hold this framework, because Sustainable Food Trust, the way we work is we kind of incubate ideas. We're a small charity. We act in a bit of a catalytic way, and this is something we've been incubating for quite some time. We don't see ourselves as the end deliverer for this framework in terms of looking after it in the long term. So the question is, who should do that? And Bridget, well, I'll ask everyone, but I'll start with you as to who you think.
Oh joy, I get the first. Thank you for that. I suspect it shouldn't be in government, but it could be an accredited agency or association of groups. So I just think taking it out of government, so it's not that can sort of that gets horribly linked into regulation sometimes, and I don't think that's where we want to go, that kind of carrot and stick. We want people to do this because it's good for their farm and they want to do it. So it's a next stepped agency, or it's an arm's length, or it's a group, an association of people. But I do think there is a need for accreditation, that if you're doing these a green finance company or a bank says, yes, you're following one of the approved approaches, whether we can actually coalesce on just one, this is a fantastic one, I'm not sure. But I do think we need a small group of accredited, approved approaches and metrics.
Tracie, what's your perspective?
I think in the conversations we've had over the years, there does seem to be a real sitting on the fence and waiting for government to come out and say something and commit to something, and everybody's kind of holding their breath waiting for that. However, we were both on a recent panel with WWF, and there were some government representatives there who were very honest and said it's not going to come quick enough, so you need to go ahead and own it. So from a bank's perspective, I think, yes, it absolutely needs to be, people want to do it because it delivers an incentive and a benefit for them. And we will, from our perspective, we're interested in the raw data rather than you've met some scheme or you've met some kind of accreditation, because that's the only way that we can have sort of uniformity across all the different ways that we're measuring it. So I don't have the answer.
And ESG is having the same trouble right now, isn't it, really? It's like free for all, basically.
Yeah, there's a complete lack of standardisation and any kind of sort of agreement on what indicators are good and what indicators are bad and what people should be using. So there's an element, I think, of people thinking just, let everyone settle on something and decide on something. But ESG is still, I think, a million miles away from where it needs to be. But there's probably not many other industries I can think of, because my job isn't just on the agriculture side, it spans all the different sectors that we support, so mobility as well as residential property, all sorts of stuff. I don't think there's any other area yet that has a framework that people could get behind as easily as I think is the work that you guys have been doing on the SFT for the last many, many years, which is interesting and potentially could be applied as an approach to other different sectors.
Richard?
Look, the organic certification scheme is a good model for and works. People have reliability on it, that they trust it. So a similar idea. I think there has to be some sort of regulation at some point, so that everyone can say yes, it really does mean something in law. I believe. But it doesn't have to be in one person's hand, like the organic certification schemes. There's lots of different organic certification bodies, and they all have a minimum standard, and some will have higher standards as well.
Joseph?
Yeah, I'm always reminded by what happened with the Science-Based Targets initiative, which was not set up by governments or anything like that, but it's become a de facto standard of how most big companies in the world do their emissions reporting. And I think in a world where, like you say, Tracie, the government's not going to step into this, I don't think, at least this government, then I think the best way that you do it is follow something similar that they did, which is do brilliant scientific research, but do not black box it. You know, put that out in the public domain, let people critique it, improve it all the time. You know, I agree with you that you want to try and do these things similar, but methodologies improve at the moment at a rate of knots. And so you need to make sure that you have the best science, and then people start to have trust and faith in that. And then I think there is a semi-official body that kind of holds that science, and that's the thing that people work to.
Fabia?
I think Joseph has really sold my line. The framework itself has to be a continually evolving thing. Our knowledge in this sector, as Joseph said, it changes every single day. I'm going to take one little element of it. We talk about nutritional density, nutritional quality, however we want to say it. It is such a hugely evolving science, which is at the moment so limited on what we can measure. That will become such an indicator of the quality of our outputs, the value of what we do, that kind of thing. So you need a body that is looking after the science within this framework first. We always said when we set out on this that it was not so much about being a disruptor. Yes, it was disruptive to say you have to create the holistic system. There is no, you chase one rainbow and someone falls off the end of the rainbow, the other end. It's about being an enabler. If we get this right, if we all come together around a framework, people like Sachs can create great tools for collecting this data. Certifiers can come in and say, this is where you've got to reach in order to reach our certification. All the systems that already exist out there and have helped farmers get this far can kick in. What we need is a steady state at the bottom. It's got to be an independent, science-based, with practical farmers. This is about farming and farmers, but with an ear to you only make it useful to farmers, you only make it valuable to farmers if they can use it in multiple different ways. Complicated.
Indeed, indeed. Okay, we're gonna pass over to you guys now for any questions. If you can just say who you are and keep your question fairly punchy and direct it to any of the panelists if you want to, that would be great. So do raise your hands. We've got a roving mic coming round. Otherwise, I'm going to pick on some people. You've got a question here.
Is this on? Yeah. Hi, I'm Esther. I'm wondering if there's ever contradicting, basically results per metric. So the one metric pushes you in the one direction, and the other metric pushes you in another direction, and how you handle that.
So yeah, we see this all the time, and I think that's the wonderful thing about farming, right? It's a complex system, and you change things, and there are unintended and intended consequences. The way we look at it is farmers, they will do the best thing for their land, right? And over the last 50 years, they've had loads of great numbers on yield, and they have optimized for that. And what this kind of data does is it just gives them a whole bunch of other things to look at, and they can make the decision about whether they want to optimize still for yield or for biodiversity a bit, or maybe for carbon sequestration, and they can choose the trade-offs that they want to make.
Great. Andy, do you have a question? You had your hand up a minute ago. Go. And then Bill will come to you.
Hi there, Andy Duff from Barclays. I just wanted to ask a general question around this. We're obviously sitting in England, but we're also sitting in the UK. There's 4 devolved agricultural policy forums, and yet there's a united trade policy, and there's some real complications around that from a kind of measurement reporting point of view and complications. So I'm pretty sure that most of you are talking about from an English perspective rather than necessarily outside that, in the sense that, if you look at DARA, for instance, what DARA has done with carbon auditing, they've really pushed that as a government-sponsored, given that we were talking about earlier on, just any views on that and whether we should be, because England is the elephant in the room in the sense. The others are obviously smaller, but they are doing some quite interesting things.
Bridget, do you want to take it, and then Fabia will go to you?
Yes, so I live in Wales. I do loads of work for Welsh Gov. And you're absolutely right. The Four Nations have gone to the winds. There almost seemed to be competition as to who could make the best cap replacement scheme. It's been very unfortunate. The national monitoring programs, what the indicators are going forward, there's no coalescence. But what makes me optimistic is that I think we now really understand that is not. We have UK requirements, we have UK commitments for biodiversity, for greenhouse gas emissions, and I think there's a real appetite for the Four Nations now to come together. And we as researchers can help. So I didn't say, from a scientific research organisation that's pan-UK. We have offices all across the UK. And I think we can help audit and stop this competitiveness between the Four Nations, and also the real risk of displacement that suddenly will have people moving from one nation to another in terms of growing food or carbon or what have you. That isn't helpful either. So I think I can see that we're getting out of that and we're going there, but we are totally aware that we can all learn from each other, and together we've got to come together as a UK to deliver on our net zero commitments and others. So thank you for raising that. Cheers.
And I think it's the heart of the problem, which is why we have to come back to this baseline. What does the system look like? What is a holistic system? It's not just carbon. It's not just the things that we feel are top of the pile today. If we don't start collecting this data now, we can't really monitor what's happening with the changes that we're making and the practices we're doing. It's not just UK. We're also working within a much wider coalition called Regen 10, but basically, you know, our farming systems, our soil are different everywhere in the UK, but in Europe, in the world, but the sustainable, the structure of the system can be seen as the same. So what the campaign is let's come together around this framework where what we should be monitoring, where we should be collecting data, and then we can all get together about how we can do that more efficiently. Shouldn't be anything to do with borders, and it shouldn't be anything to do even with national borders.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to know more about Regen 10 specifically, and I've got some bits of paper which explain it, so come and ask me afterwards. And Rupert's here as well, expert in the room. H, and then Bill, I'll come to you.
Okay, just going back to the last question about, I'm a sheep farmer in North Wales, so the last question from the floor was very pertinent. And I think we've been on the regen route about 7 years. We don't really do any proper measurement at the moment, because I think we're all nervous if you do, until you've got an accredited, agreed measurement system, we might all be wasting our time and money. And the point that Tracie made about, you know, accredited, independent accredited measurers is what we're all waiting for, really. And the sooner we can get that all agreed, the happier we'll all be to launch down the system of measuring, I would have thought.
Bill, do you want to ask your question, and then anyone can respond to both if they want to?
Thanks, Adele. Bill Herditch from Sydney. Question to Tracie and others, perhaps. Where's the pressure coming from in the supply chain, or the call come from for metrics? Is it the anecdotes from us is that the market at the mum and dad end is not asking for it. Supermarkets maybe are. Financial institutions have been told by TCFD they've got to get their act together. So just a general question: where's the pull for this, and where can we pull the lever better to get a better outcome at the end?
So from our perspective, very much regulation, so TCFD was what really kicked it off, but also the recognition that we had this ambition that we wanted to go after this climate pillar and, you know, be environmentally responsible, socially responsible, do all the right things for all the right reasons. In the journey over the last few years, I think we've seen that change. So it started out very much a focus on carbon equivalents, and supporting our farmers in whatever the retailers might ask of them, whatever the certifiers might ask of them, whatever government might ask of them. And it's kind of evolved into a bit more of a realisation that, okay, we're not going to get the steer from government that perhaps everybody wants. as quickly as we want it. So what needs to happen? And in the conversations we've had with the likes of Tesco's, McCain, more recently been talking to Google, all sorts of different stakeholders, there's a real want for this, a real need for this kind of raw data that can be used by different people for different purposes. And the point that was made earlier on around, kind of waiting for a certification scheme, well, if you're collecting the data anyway, and hopefully something like the GFM means you only need to collect it once, you're prepared for whatever decision comes down the line, whether it's the supermarket telling you that they need some green tractor scorecard or their own scorecard completed, or if it's government saying you need to prove certain outcomes in order to qualify for subsidies. You're already prepared. You already have that data pulled together. That's kind of how we've seen the shift, and more recently with TNFD as well. So the focus on nature and biodiversity. We also do a lot on the social side within the bank as well. So we had a green social bond that we launched recently, and just had a very impromptu conversation with Patrick about the social aspect in farming as well, and how we support farmers on that. So
yeah, and just for clarity, I always get confused with the accent there.
So TCFD is the carbon accounting in finance, carbon accounting financial disclosures, and alongside that you've got PCAF, which is the principles of carbon accounting in finance, and then TNFD is the nature side of things, so nature financial disclosures, and PBAF, which is the principles for biodiversity accounting in finance. There's no shortage of
world of fun.
No shortage of acronyms.
Richard, go for it. Yeah.
A good time to make a farming comment, and a plea to all the farmers in here: don't be necessarily led by all this. Please, we weren't led to get where we are. We do a lot of things wrong, but I hope we're going in the right direction. Farming needs to be in the service of all life on Earth. It's so important. One of the metrics we haven't talked about, no one's mentioned, is water quality. Water quality is so important. I'm in touch with our Wessex Water, who's our local abstractor, and Thames Water, who's been in the press this week, but for other reasons. And they have both huge problems with pesticides in their water. It's a real issue, and it's becoming more of an issue, not less. So, we all know what we're doing as farmers, and some of these things are leaving our farms and having really adverse effects, and this is all part of this metric that's going on. We know what we're doing. Really think about what we're doing and whether we can do it better. Yes, we can record and do these things afterwards as a consequence, not as a lead, I would suggest. It's good to record it, because then we can say, oh, look, we've done this and we've achieved this. But step back and think, now what am I doing? Is it the best thing to do? Who else is doing something good? Can I go and get advice from them? Can they, share their good practice?
Just to add to that, because he couldn't be closer, and to Bill's point, if we just wait for the call for who wants this stuff, we will be dealing with the symptom and not the cause. We have to have resilient, sustainable farms and food production systems at farm level. Without that, the rest is pointless. We can report as many things about nature risk. Remember, it's nature risk to the business, not the risk to nature in TNFD and TCFD. So it's it's looking at, if you're a company, are you reporting the risks to your business of not doing this stuff, not the risks to our planet of not doing this stuff. So we must start at the ground up. We've got to build the foundations of this data collection that makes our farming better and drive change. Remember, it's change and not just looking for better results so that you can put it on your packet.
Dorina, we'll go to you, and then... No, that's good. I'm coming at it from a different place, I think, slightly.
but hugely interested in all of this. Just a small farm, 100-acre organic farm, and we have
And
several
Ballymaloe
audits
Cookery
a
School,
year,
I should say.
and each of them are, often there's overlap between it and so on. But yet there's nothing to monitor. Am I getting better, or am I slipping back, or whatever? And so really, and I think maybe I missed, but what exactly, is there a list of what's being measured at the moment? I mean, what I want to know is, my soil better or slipping back? Is the fertility of the soil building? Is it more sustainable? Am I enhancing the environment more, the water quality, all those fairly basic things? It's for, in a way, it's just, this is more a personal thing. I'm not selling to any of the big supermarkets or anything like that, but I just, for the good of everything, I just want to feel that we're making progress, and if we're not making progress, are we going backwards? So is it in any way aimed at people like me at this level? Because I feel there are many of us who would like to just feel we're making a bit of progress, or if we weren't making progress, what can we do?
I mean, yeah, it's for everybody, I think, whether you're a small farm, large farm, selling for yourself, selling into a big grain aggregator, I think there's value for this. And yeah, so...
I know there's value, but what are we measuring so far?
So in exchange, there's 30 things that we look at. So soil health is one of them. The pollution that goes into rivers, if there is any, is another one. Animal welfare. We look at carbon emissions, sequestration, all the things that people will be asking and probably that you're interested in. And it's like a one-stop shop. So you get it all in one hit, and it's there for you. You can see, and then we come back every 3 years, or you can add your own data if you want to do it. And so you can see, are you heading in the right direction or not in the right direction? And you can see what are other farms like yours doing, similar 100-acre farms. Are they got better soils, worse soils, that kind of stuff?
Richard?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little point about what we're measuring, because the methodology for doing all this measurement, as you were asking about earlier, it's all there. We know what to do as scientists. We know exactly what to measure, don't we, Bridget? But the problem is, it's very expensive. As farmers, to prioritize these expensive measures, so the total carbon measurement, for example, which is the excellent one to do, is much more, order of 10 times more expensive than a loss on ignition, for example. And if you want to measure your biodiversity, you need to have someone out in the field to count them, whatever it is. And that costs a lot of money. So that's why it doesn't happen. It's a simple cost thing. And if we had some support with that, a plea for actually measuring these things, and I think part of, I keep asking for this, part of countryside stewardship, for example, ought to be a bursary for farmers to get educated on these subjects, and also to have funding with these measures, because it's very expensive. But we can do it. It's not a problem. But doing it properly is expensive.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Bridget, I'll come to you, and then we're running out of time, so I'm going to take 3 or 4 more questions in a bulk, and then I'm going to ask each panellist to just respond and wrap up. But Bridget, and then I'll take a mic over to the back corner there.
So totally get the cost, but also can you afford not to do it? But I would also say AI, it's all the thing that we all hate at the moment, but it's actually able to get on your phone, you take a photograph, and it will tell you what your plant is. It will then tell you if that's a good indicator of your pollinator strip or what have you, or a bad. It is also, we can do it for pollinators, we can do it for moths. AI and machine learning is actually meaning that you all can be experts. And if you want to come more UKCEH 10, we will show you the e-surveyor that helps you become an expert overnight because it's using the AI technology. You were saying earlier, things are changing. The day that you had to pay for an expert botanist to come in and do it, it is starting to change. So hold on for that. And there's already tools out there you can load up into your phone and start doing for yourself. Thank you.
Thanks, Bridget. So question over here, and then I'll maybe take 4 more questions in a go. So come to you first.
Thanks, everyone. Is this? Yeah, great. I'm Catherine Burson from the University of Cambridge, and I'm interested in the topic of measuring, and particularly from the farm practice side. So it is expensive to get measurements on biodiversity and soil health, but it might be easier for farmers to track what it is that they're doing on the farm. So how are farm practices integrated into the global farm metric?
Okay, Brill. Another question in the middle here, lady in green jacket.
Hi. It's a question for Richard. I just would like a kind of specific list of the measuring or audits that you think are value for money before grants are available or bursaries available to get this for a farm to do. Because you can spend a lot of money and a lot of human time measuring soil, measuring your biodiversity, measuring your carbon audit. It's expensive. So what are the top 3, top 4 that you would recommend to do?
Great. And then here and here, please. And then striped t-shirt, and then go at the front.
Martina Henry from the Kraft Heinz Company. I wanted to firstly very quickly address the question of what's driving this, and from a food business perspective, it is absolutely carbon taxation and security of supply. We recognise, I think, as an industry that we will not have a business if we don't start addressing some of these critical issues on farm, and that farmers are at the centre of that. The second thing I guess I'm curious about is that as a food company, we're a member of the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative platform that have for 2 decades defined essentially, I guess, what sustainable agriculture is on the basis of it being very crop and location agnostic. But we recognise that that hasn't driven the impacts, and now we're trying to define a set of metrics under a global framework for regenerative agriculture. And I'm just curious as to whether or not you're working with them from the Global Farm Metric. What's the panel's critique of Side Platform and those 170 companies trying to come together to drive this kind of harmonised, benchmarked approach?
Good question, and we'll go here, and then we'll...
Hello, Bertie Matthews here from Matthews Cotswold Flour. The farmers are doing the work in the fields, are doing an amazing job. We know what the measurements are and how to measure it. We talked about the cost of it. Should it be the duty of producers to help pay for the standardised measurements? Because there are producers out there. So should it be the duty of the producers to help pay for this?
Okay, so we've got farm practices. What are the top 4 measures for you? Side Platform, Fabi, I might give that to you. And who should pay? But I'm going to ask each panelist to kind of respond to which of those they would like, and also say, or ask a final question. When we're all sitting back here in a year's time, hopefully Groundswell might have us back. We haven't been too badly behaved, I hope. What is the breakthrough that you're going to be talking about that has happened between now and then that has moved this forward? Fabi.
Okay, I'm going to start on the practices. Practices are incredibly important. They're the how, but they're the way that we've been trying to work out the solutions for the last, well, for some people, for 20, 30 years. They're really, really important, but we now have to also actually measure the outcomes of those practices because of the unintended consequences for the things that we don't know. You need both, but we need simple ways of constantly monitoring our systems over time that do the outcomes. So that's my answer to that. So yes, practices are important, but you need to capture both, even if, and we can find some simple, less expensive ways. That's where we're focused. Let technology take it to more sophistication. And the other one I'm going to do, because in Regen 10 we're working very closely with Side Platform, and you know their incredible reputation. They are out there collecting data over a huge range of farms. Where we're pushing everybody as a mission from Regen 10 and from the Global Farm Metric is you need to be completely holistic. That takes in the social aspects of the framework, economic, it needs to be sustainable for farmers to farms in the way that we're pushing them to do, and that you need to be able to collect primary data to measure those outcomes. So the extra push from where SCI are moving, and their new regenerative framework is beginning to move in that direction, is alongside the practices. Alongside that, you need to be capturing the outcomes data on the whole system. That's where we're all moving. If you're out there with the technology doing it, it's much, much more difficult to change than for us to think these things up in our heads.
Breakthrough, what's your breakthrough?
Breakthrough is we are really talking about the framework as the starting point, and we're thinking it from the farmer perspective first and not the reporting outcomes.
I'll take your question, Bertie, because I think you're totally right. At least in the short term, you know, this is a new thing. It is not an easy time to be farming at the moment. And so whilst these, you know, services are emerging, the supply chain should definitely share the cost. And with Soil Association Exchange, they're happy to do it. You know, we've got Lloyd's Bank paying, we've got M&S, Co-op, we've got Nestle. You know, lots of these brands are willing because they want to understand this information too. But I think, we always say farmers should hold on to that data. It's theirs. They're the ones that should be able to get the value from this first. But if they're benefiting from it, then they should pay. My breakthrough would be... Oh, God, that's a big question. I mean, how long have we got? 2 years, 3 years, 1 year? 1 year. Oh, God. My breakthrough would be that what happened in Northern Ireland, where the government said £45 million, baseline every single farm, that DEFRA does the same here.
To answer your question about what would I measure, I think number one is to use your eyes and learn how to observe things. So it's a real skill that we all have and perhaps we don't use very often. And there's a picture of a farm gate I put up sometimes with a bend in the gate. And the idea is that the farmer stands there and looks over the gate so often that he puts a dent in the gate. It's that concept of observation all the time. Just stop and look. Your plants in your fields will tell you what your soil is doing, as long as they're not fed with artificial fertilizers and propped up by agrochemicals. So if they're natural, and if even if you're still doing that, you can look at the margins of your fields and see how they're performing. So observation is your free ticket, if you like, to your experiencing and seeing the results on your farm. And it's so important and absolutely primary by a long way. So it's number 1 to 9. And number 10, perhaps, in my experience, is probably soil organic matter. It's relatively easy. You can do a loss on ignition test as long as you know and record where the lab is and what temperature they do at the test at. The other point is to make sure you know where you've taken your samples from in the field. So it's a complicated process, and if you want to talk to me about that more afterwards, I'm happy to do that. But I would suggest you zone your fields. That's an expensive process too, but you only do it once. Okay, so just a one-off. And then you always go back to the same point in the fields. So it's practical. So those two things.
What's your break?
Breakthrough, sell the farm, buy a yacht, and go and retire to the Mediterranean.
Tracie.
Not a lot to add other than what Joseph said, really, absolutely. If any stakeholder is benefiting from the farmer collecting this data, they absolutely should be paying for it in one way, shape or form. From a banking perspective, how we do that, I think we're still trying to grapple through with that, and that's why we need the data really to properly understand what the sort of levers that we can push and pull on to help. We know that whilst we got things like our £100 billion worth of green and sustainable financing that we're planning to do, most farmers don't really want to get in debt. So what is it that we can do? We've got a partnership with McCain that was recently announced, and we're exploring other opportunities with different partners as to how we do that. Also got a partnership announced 2 days ago with the WWF, which is looking how we bring together public and private financing to support farmers. Again, this idea that if there's multiple stakeholders should be paying for this. Breakthrough. Sticking on brand, we're going to have an absolutely fantastic pilot that we're going to run with the GFM with some really meaningful outcomes and a really powerful case study that can prove its capability that we can get behind. That's my outcome.
Love it. I'm booking you in for a keynote already next year, Tracie. Bridget.
So I'm going to do the who pays, and I'm going to do the mixed model, which might sound like, but in Dara in Northern Ireland, all that data will be completely free to everybody. So if the government pays, then it's available to everyone. I do think some of the producers should pay, and personally, I do think that we should all perhaps just take some responsibility. It's our major asset. Why wouldn't you want to know what's going on underneath your feet? And why wouldn't you want to invest in that in addition to all the fabulous bits of kit out there? And I think just to say that it's government, rather, I just am very surprised. I know it's expensive, but everything we do is expensive. And to not measure your soil, for example, and this, which is for future generations, right? this is the legacy. So I would do that. So it's a mixed model. I don't think we can just palm it off on government. The big breakthrough is I would love to come here next time and have the 4 nations and the soils community have banged their heads together so that no one ever says again, when you've all sorted it out, I'll get on with it. I would love us all to have said, there's 3 or 4, but these are all the ones you can do. Just pick one, do your method, make sure you go to the right place, and just get on and do it, because you just have to do it. So that's my breakthrough in a year, and I would love any of the rest of the panel to come and say, let's just try and do it finally. Thank you.
Let's just do it. I think that's a great message to end on. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our lovely panel. Thanks to the tech team. We'll see you next year.